Albert was right. The fair unknown had resolved, doubtless, to carry the intrigue no farther. For although the young men made several more turns, they did not again see the calash, which had turned up one of the neighboring streets. Then they returned to the Rospoli Palace. But the Count and the blue domino had also disappeared. The two windows, hung with yellow damask, were still occupied by the persons whom the Count had invited. At this moment, the same bell that had proclaimed the beginning of the Masquerade sounded the retreat. The file on the Corso broke the line, and in a second all the carriages had disappeared. Franz and Albert were opposite the Via del Murata. The coachman, without saying a word, drove up it, passed along the Piazza di Spagna and the Rospoli Palace, and stopped at the door of the hotel. Signor Pastrini came to the door to receive his guests. Franz hastened to inquire after the Count, and to express regret that he had not returned in sufficient time. But Pastrini reassured him by saying that the Count of Monte Cristo had ordered a second carriage for himself, and that it had gone at 4 o'clock to fetch him from the Rospoli Palace. The Count had, moreover, charged him to offer the two friends the key to his box at the Argentina. Franz questioned Albert as to his intentions, but Albert had great projects to put into execution before going to the theater, and instead of making any answer, he inquired if Signor Pastrini could procure him a tailor. "A tailor," said the host. "And for what?" "To make us between now and tomorrow 2 Roman peasant costumes," returned Albert. The host shook his head. I love this little comedy of manners that is evolving between Albert and Pastrini. It's not quite Faulty Towers level, but Pastrini in his deep Romanness, his Italianness, really just always shaking his head at the Parisian requests of Albert and sometimes Franz. One thing that caught my eye here, and I did just a smidge of research, so I don't have an extensive knowledge base on this, but that the Carnival just rings its little bell and suddenly 300,000 people just disappear. That's crazy. I can't imagine that's efficient or even accomplishable. There's got to be hangers about, right? I don't know what the strict time limits are. What's the curfew? What's the penalty if you go beyond curfew? Are you getting fined? Are you getting thrown in jail? I bet it depends on your status, your wealth. And there's one more thing I want to talk about here that is just, it's real vague, and I apologize for that. And I tried to write this down in my notes in a way that made sense, but I think it's one of these things I just got to talk out, and maybe it'll come to some understanding. There's something going on here in the dynamic between Franz and Albert and Pastrini and the Count of Monte Cristo. Dante, I don't know why I called him the Count. He's even influencing me. Oh my God, Dante, you're so powerful! Point being, this trifecta, this triangle, is how, these sorts of communications happened, especially in aristocratic travel, where there are intermediaries and housekeepers who see to things, right? Your concierges, your fill in the blanks. So that's a real system dynamic that exists in the real world. And Dumas is tapping into an existing thing, not only to be realistic and root this in reality, but to further emphasize Dante's way of interacting with the world. It's saying something about Dante's character that Dumas is choosing to allow a character like Pastrini to have so much space in the story in order to allow Dante to be absent. It would be weird if Pastrini didn't exist and Franz and Albert would just show up back at the hotel and be like, well, where'd Dante go? He wasn't in his window at the palace, and now he's not back at the hotel. What's going on here? They would have to do a certain amount of investigating that would take up page count, which we do not have space for in this book. But it's rooting Dante's mystique, his disguise, everything that he's doing. It's rooting it into something real. And that balance of who is this man? How does he have access to all of these resources? It allows for that, but places it inside of kind of an administrative system. He has a carriage that they were able to use throughout the day, and they came back to give him back his carriage, and he has a different carriage? So he's just letting them have the carriage now, and also his box seats at the opera? Like, these things don't matter to Dante. And I guess to further illustrate this and try to come to some sort of point here, it would be one thing if Pastrini didn't exist and Albert and Franz had to go and investigate and find all this stuff out for themselves, right? Eats up page count and doesn't really... It changes the mystery. I was going to say it doesn't really add depth to it, but it would change the type of mystery and mystique around Dante. Conversely, if Dante was the one saying, here, you can have my carriage for the day. I'm going to head out at 4 p.m. in my other carriage. And also, why don't you all take my keys to the theater tonight? That is a different depth and dimension to Dante's character that I don't think Dumas wants us to have. That makes him seem more generous rather than this method, which makes him seem kind of blasé. Like, these things don't matter to me. Clearly they matter to you. You go and have fun with them. I got shit to take care of. It allows also for a distancing effect where Franz and Albert can't question Dante about his actions and motives. So it keeps that mystique while rooting it in the real world and keeping the pages moving. I don't know if that's insightful or not. It was just something that occurred to me and felt like I had to talk out because we have 1,500 episodes to do on this show, and I need to talk about something. As a writer, I find that to be kind of interesting. Those are the sorts of like procedural things that as a writer, especially in like the middle of your book or story or screenplay, you get caught up on. And I can't tell you how many unnecessary research spirals I've gone down to go, okay, how does the taxi cab system in New York work in the 1970s? Like, you don't really need to know all that shit. But there's nothing more satisfying as a writer than to distract yourself throughout a day's work by looking up something that ultimately doesn't matter so that you can feel dissatisfied at the end of the day. Being a writer is a lonely and miserable job. Okay, join me here tomorrow with a little bit more of Chapter 36. Let's see what these two rapscallions get up to at the theater. Until then, okay, goodbye.